This is a recording for topic 14.4, factoring trinomials. Our objective today is to factor trinomials, so our essential question is, how can I factor trinomials? We talked about factoring yesterday and how it was the opposite of multiplication, so our bell work today is going to be, let's recall how to multiply. So when we multiplied, we took the first term, let's try that again, first term in the parenthesis, multiply every term in the second parenthesis by that first term. So our first step was to distribute. So we're going to distribute the first term. This gives us x times 3x. It'll say plus x times 2. We distributed the first term. Now we need to distribute the second one. So plus a negative 3 times 3x, and then plus a negative 3 times 2. When we multiply out, that's our second step, is to multiply each term out. So x times 3x gives us a 3x squared. Plus x times 2, we write that as 2x. Plus negative 3 times 3x is negative 9x. And then plus negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. So first distribute, second multiply, last we are going to combine like terms. So I'm going to call that CLT, combine like terms. We don't have any other x squared, so we write the 3x squared. You'll see that we can combine the 2x and the negative 9x. That becomes a negative 7x. And then we are left with a negative 6 at the end. So what we've done is we've taken two terms, or two binomials, multiplied them together, and we came up with our answer of a trinomial. We're going to do number 2. Again, start with the outside. 3x times 2x. And then 3x times 5x. So plus 3x times 5. There's no x on that 5. Plus, we'll take the 1 on the inside, so 1 times 2x. And then our last together, so plus 1 times 5. So 3x times 2x, we get a 6x squared. Plus 3x times 5x is 15x. Plus 1 times 2x, it's 2x, plus 1 times 5, that is 5. So we distribute it, we've multiplied, now we're going to combine like terms. There are no other x squared, so we have 6x squared. We have a positive 15 plus a positive 2x. This is going to give us a positive 17x, and then we have a plus 5 at the end. So notice that when I took my first two terms and multiplied them, that gave me the first term in the trinomial. Our last two terms, when we multiply, gives me the last term in our trinomial. This is going to be very helpful for us when we start doing working backwards. So you can check your answers to 14.3 by pausing. And now we're going to learn how to factor. It is helpful if you have your previous topics out, because we will be dealing with how to find products and sums like we've done in 14.3 and 14.2. Is learning how to do the products and sums. And so they do come in handy. So the first thing I want you to do is we're going to look at a given trinomial and figure out, how do we recognize the sum and the product? Because I need to know what the sum and the product are before we can then find the factors of them. So our sum comes from the middle term. Okay? So our sum here is negative 7. The sum is always the number in front of the x. Next, I want us to find the product. The way that we get the product, I'm going to give myself some helpful hints. The sum is the number in front of x. My product, since I've already used the number that's in front of the x, I still have two other numbers. I have the number in front of the x squared and then my constant. So my product is going to be that first number times the last number. So when I want the product, we multiply the first and the last. If I think of this in terms of A, B, and C, because this is for any general, so here's my A, B, and C. Our sum comes from B, and our product comes from taking A and multiplying it times C. For some of you, that might be helpful. Others, it might be confusing. So if it was confusing, please ignore. So our product is 3 times negative 6, or negative 18. Now we are going to find what two numbers will multiply to give me negative 18, but add to give me negative 7. And we did this when we did topic 14-2 on how to find the two numbers. And if you were unable to come up with the numbers off the top of your head, then you could use the calculator. Remember the calculator, y1, we put in the product and then divide by x. So in this case, we would put in negative 18, divide by x, and then we would hit second graph. So to find the two numbers that multiply to get the product and add to the sum, we need our factors. So we can have 1 and negative 18, but when I add those together, that sum comes out to be negative 17. I need it to be negative 7. So then we'll go 2 and negative 9. That sum comes out to be negative 7. So 2 and negative 9 are our correct sums, or our correct numbers. Now, our last question is, how can we use this information in order to factor that trinomial, the 3x squared minus 2, or minus 7x minus 6? So what I have here is 3x squared minus 7x minus 6. We want to factor it. Just like we factored this negative 18, we found two things that I can multiply together. So I'm looking for two things that I can multiply, that when I multiply it out, it is going to give me this 3x squared minus 7x minus 6. The way we're going to multiply is we're going to use this method I like to call bottoms up. Okay, so we're going to take the two numbers that we have and put them in the bottom of a fraction. So these two numbers, they go in the bottom of the fraction. Next, we're going to take our coefficient of x squared, and it will go in the top of the fraction. So our coefficient of the x squared is the 3x, or the 3. Next, we're going to reduce that fraction. So 3 over 2 does not reduce, it stays 3 over 2. I cannot simplify that fraction any further. Our other fraction is 3 over negative 9. And notice that the bottom number is negative, so I'm going to go ahead and put a negative already in the bottom. And now I can just deal with 3 over 9. But 3 over 9 does reduce to 1 over 3. One of the things I can use is my calculator to help me reduce that fraction. So I'm going to show you how to reduce a fraction using the calculator. To reduce a fraction on the calculator, you type in the fraction itself. So we started off with 3 over 2 in our first one. 3 divided by 2, and then we're going to hit math, enter, enter. It stayed 3 over 2. So let's look at 3 over 9. So 3 divided by 9, hit math, enter, enter. That's changed to 1/3. So I put the 1/3, but I had a negative with the 9 in the bottom, so the negative goes with the 3. Now that I have reduced this fraction, now I can write my factors. The fractions are what help me determine what numbers go into the parentheses. So the top number of the fraction will go in first. It's 3, and then follow it by an x. The bottom number is what's going to go in second. So this is a positive 2, so I'll put plus 2. I'll look at my other fraction, second fraction. Top number goes in first, so this is 1x. Bottom number goes in second, so minus 3. I have come up with my factors. We call this bottoms up because we put the numbers in the bottom and then we put something on top and then we bring it on up and make our factors. I can do a quick check if I take these two, and I'm going to use my first term. So if I look at 3x times 1x, that's going to give me 3x squared. That is the first term of the trinomial. If I look at the last two, so 2 times a negative 3, get a negative 6. That is the last number in the trinomial, so it works also. So just checking those first and the last will help me to ensure that, yes, I did factor correctly. So let's recall what we did. First, we had to determine what the sum of the product was. Then we had to find the two numbers that will give us the sum in that product. We used those two numbers and put them in the bottom of our fraction. And then we used the number in front of x squared to go in the top of the fraction. And then we reduced the fractions and used the reduced fractions to create our factors. So I've said it, now we're going to write it in our summary. So our first thing is to get the sum and the product. So the sum is the number in front of x. And the product is we multiply the first and the last coefficient. Our second step we did was then we had to find the two numbers that added to the sum but multiplied to the product. Once we found those two numbers, we created a fraction. Okay, and I'm going to go up here and say this is number 1 and number 2. Create a fraction. Number 1 on the bottom, number 2 on the bottom. And then our numerators, so our bottoms are the numbers from step 2. The numerators, the top, was the coefficient of x squared, also known as a if we're looking at ax squared plus b squared plus c. Step 4, we reduce the fraction. So we have a top 1 and a bottom 1, depending on how that reduced. And then a top fraction of 2 and a bottom fraction of 2, depending on how that reduced. And last, we're going to use this fraction to create the factors. So I have my top number from the first fraction times x plus the bottom from the first fraction. And put my x's as a different color. Then I have the top from the second fraction times x plus the bottom from the second fraction. Let's use these steps and do some practice problems. Okay, so I put my summary on this so I can make sure I can follow through. First thing I want us to do is find the sum and the products. So let's look. In our first one, our sum is the number with in front of the x. There's not a number shown. There's an understood 1, so my sum is 1. Our product is going to be 3 times a negative 4. 3 times a negative 4 is negative 12. I'm looking for two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 12, but will add to give me a positive 1. So referring back to my notes, if I don't remember, or I can come up with the numbers immediately, 4 and negative 3 will multiply to give you a negative 12, but add to give you a positive 1. So we're going to take those two numbers, and we're going to create a fraction. 4 is in one of them, negative 3 is in the other. My top number in the fraction is going to be in front of the x squared. It's the number in front of the x squared. So I have a 3 and then a 3. Now I'm going to reduce the fraction. So let's do this. Let me label. This is my step 1, the product and sum. Step 2, we found the two numbers. Step 3, we created our fraction. And now we're going to reduce. 3 over 4 does not reduce. It says 3 over 4. 3 over negative 3, I see a negative. I'm going to go ahead and write it in the bottom. 3 divided by 3 is a positive 1. I want to make it look like a fraction, so I'm going to put it over a 1. But my negative stays in the bottom, always. So now that I've reduced, that was step 4. Step 5 is to create my factors. So parenthesis and parenthesis using the fractions. We'll get 3x plus 4, and from the second fraction we'll get x minus 1. Or I should say 1x minus 1. So when we write our answer, we have the 3x plus 4. I do not have to show the 1 in front of the x. So x minus 1 will be just as good. Okay, problem number 2. The sum, the number in front of the x, and the product is 1 times the negative 70. That gives us a negative 70. So there's step 1 from our summary. Finding the two numbers that'll multiply give you negative 70, but add to give you a positive 3. That's going to be a positive 10 and a negative 7. Step 3 says let's create fractions. We're going to use those numbers as our denominators. And our numerator is going to be the number in front of the x squared. In this case, it is a 1. So in this case, our step 3 and 4 are the same. I cannot reduce 1/10, and I cannot reduce 1 over negative 7. So now my last thing is to create my factors using the fractions. So the top number first, x, and then plus the bottom number 10. From the second fraction, top number first times the x plus the bottom number, that's a negative 7, so I can just put minus 7. Okay, we're going to do number 3. Our sum is the number in the middle, negative 11x. Our product is 2 times 12. Sorry, don't need the x on the sum. That's 24. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give you 24, but add to give you negative 11. Our two numbers are negative 8 and negative 3. Again, if you cannot remember those two numbers or how we found them, refer back to topic 14-2. I did it right, 14-2. So first step, sum and product. Second step, we found the numbers. Third step, create our fractions. Those numbers go on the bottom, negative 8, negative 3. Number that goes on top is the number in front of the x squared. Step 4 is to reduce the fraction. 2 over negative 8 can become 1 over negative 4. Remember, the negative always stays in the bottom. 2 over negative 3 cannot reduce. It stays as 2 over negative 3. So these are fractions that we use in order to create our factors. Top number is 1 times x plus the bottom number, or say minus 4. Top number is 2 times x and then minus 3. Number 4, we have our sum and our products need to find. So now you'll see me say S and P's. Let's find our S and P's. Our sum is negative 3. Our product is 9 times the negative 20. 9 times the negative 20 is negative 180. Finding the two numbers that multiply to give you negative 180, but add to give you a negative 3. This one might be a little more tricky because that is a huge number. So I am going to bring out my calculator. Apologize for going all over the place. And I'm going to use the calculator. In y1, I'll put the product, negative 180 divided by x, and then hit second graph. So clear out what we already have. We have a negative 180 divided by x. We'll hit second graph. This is going to bring up all the possible factors. So I'm trying to find one that's going to add up to negative 3. I can do in my head 1 times negative 180 will not add up to negative 3. 2 plus a negative 90, not a negative 3. 3 and negative 60, still not a negative 3. 4 minus 45, that's a negative 41. 5 and negative 36, I'm still in the 30s. 6 and negative 30, that still gives me a negative 24 when I add them. I can skip the ones with decimals. 9 and negative 20. 9 plus a negative 20 is a negative 11. Still doesn't work. 10 and negative 18. Add it together will give me a negative 8. 11 has a decimal. We have 12 and negative 15. And sure enough, 12 and a negative 15, when I add them together, this sum does come out to be a negative 3. These are my two numbers. So this is how a calculator can help you come up with those factors, especially if it's something that you can't come up with all on your own. Okay, we have our factors. Let's create our fractions. We have 12 on one denominator and negative 15 on the other. You have a 9 on top. Let's reduce. Again, I'm going to use my calculator to see, can I reduce this? Let's try that again. Calculator. I'm going to type in 9 divided by 12, hit math, enter. And that does reduce to 3 over 4. Then we have a 9 over negative 15. Again, I'm going to put the negative in the bottom. That way I don't have to worry about it. So 9 divided by 15, math, enter, and we get 3/5. Except the 5 is a negative because the 15 was a negative. So here are my two fractions. Let's write our factors. The first fraction gives us 3x plus 4. Second fraction gives us 3x minus 5. I'm going to do a quick check to be sure. 3x times 3x does give me 9x squared. 4 times negative 5 does give me a negative 20. This concludes topic 14-4.